You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And as we do every Monday, every Friday, we kick off your week with Star Wars, and we finish your week with Star Wars. We're live on Mondays at 8-ish. And we're live at 11, usually, on Fridays. And it's interesting because, as you guys heard in the open, starts out with a lightsaber igniting. And that's really relevant to tonight's discussion, actually, because we're going to dive a little bit deep into the lightsaber combat styles, or the forms. There's 7 of them. And, we got a little support graphics for this. We're going to try to get into this, but we're going to do it now. This was your idea, I think. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Because, sometimes, we're sending stuff back and forth so much. But it's really interesting because, just to kick this thing off, I don't actually think that a lot of people, especially casual fans, are even aware that there's all these different lightsaber forms. Like these combat forms.
It's not mentioned in the films.
It's never mentioned in the films. I'm trying to even think of like where it came from, and a
lot of the books mention them. Like
maybe that was it.
Books and or comics where they've talked about, when they've had like training moments and stuff like that. Like you'll have stuff like that where they'll, have a master and a Padawan or something like that, and they'll kind of be breaking some things down.
But they don't actually mention the names, though. At least, yeah, in the books they do. Well, Dragonfly Mask says everybody knows that Shii-Cho is the best. Ted Adam Green, is with us. He said this will be educational and fun. Thanks, guys. Yeah, and that's pretty much what it is, And to be honest, we're even learning some stuff too along with this. Again, this isn't so much of a geeky little discussion, although I'm sure it'll get that way, and I'm sure the average person it might seem that way. Right. You're talking about lightsaber forms. Pretty much the non-geekiness part of this is sailed, but at the same time, though, it's really getting into this and seeing how it's reflected in the films, the different characters that use the different styles, what they mean. And then, of course, just discussing why we think that, because, they didn't really have to get into this kind of detail. They could have just left it pretty much like how you see it in the films, right? It's just like, okay, This is the Jedi style, this is the Sith style. You could have just left it like that. You didn't necessarily have to get into this big discussion or even create these different forms, because if you think about it, somebody had to create them, somebody had to name them. Obviously they have the roots and in the samurai and the and the various martial arts and things like that, and we'll get into that. And because you're into that, you'll be able to speak to that better than I can. But yeah, I just think it's a really cool thing. And of course, when we talk about the different lightsaber styles and again, when you talk about this again, it's really less about what a lot of people think of when you say that, or most people are thinking the hilt design or maybe the kyber crystal that's in it. It's really more about the fighting forms. It's really more about, what fighting form do they use? Because you have forms 1 through 7. And the different forms obviously have different advantages, different disadvantages. And, it's just like which characters are using which forms, or who favors a particular form. So, yeah, obviously this is something that is kind of interesting, and I think would be beneficial for a lot of our viewers anyway to discuss with us, get into. Because again, if you guys aren't part of the live discussion, obviously feel free to join us in the comments section and continue the discussion. Of course, we can continue it on Discord or anywhere else. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. That's the way to do it. So when you were coming up with this, because this wasn't really based on anything. In fact, I remember when you said it, I had to find something that I'm like, all right, let me find something that, basically supports this. What triggered it?
Honestly, I always thought it was interesting and cool because, one, just everything that goes into Star Wars. We talk about the technology, the advancement of technology, like George Lucas, what he's done, the storytelling aspect of it, and part of the storytelling aspect is the combat, the whole. George Lucas kind of like the dogfighting aspect, and that's why you kind of see that reflected in a lot of the space battles with the assault on both Death Stars and even the battle of Scarif in Rogue One. But then when you start getting into like some of the lightsaber battles, which a lot of people, love, and that's one of the big draws to Star Wars, quite frankly. We often talk about in the original trilogy, George Lucas kind of envisioned like these things, like you've often said, that these are like broadswords. They're heavy, they have these more lumbering kind of movements. But then when he got to the prequels, and his explanation for it in the prequels was that, like, okay, the reason why the lightsaber movements and everything was kind of slower in the original trilogy was because you didn't have Jedi really around at that time. Whereas when you look at the prequels, now you're kind of still dealing with the Jedi somewhat in their prime. So there's still a great wealth of them around. And so now you have these different lightsaber styles. And everybody kind of has, everybody has a different way of fighting. Because it's because of your size, whether you're tall, whether you're short, whether you are heavier, whether you're smaller, whether you have webbed hands or fur. There's so many different things that play a part into how you fight. And that's indicative, honestly, in real life. For somebody like myself, who's very much into the martial arts and have been studying them for years, there are certain things that I just don't do because it doesn't suit me. It becomes a personal thing. It's, everybody's like, oh, I want to do stuff. I want to fly around the air. Like, well, look, I'm not 140 pounds. I'm not about to be jumping off of stuff, and yeah, they're fun and fancy to look at. And it's cool. Like, oh, look, he can do a spin kick, but it's like, okay, what are you sacrificing for that? And so that's what kind of brought me to the whole lightsaber duel things, is because we've seen different people like, oh man, how did this person lose, or how did this person get beat? Well, sometimes it could just be the force or the will of the force, or sometimes it's actually the style of combat, because you have different people using different things at different times. And like you said, Eric, certain things have strengths and weaknesses. So I thought this would be a kind of a cool thing. What I'm going to do tonight, though, is as we go through these, we're going to talk about the actual lightsaber form, but then I kind of took the extra step to try to make it more relevant to modern day. So what I did was I paired what that would be like in a modern day martial art, what is comparative to so to speak, to a modern day martial art.
Well, and then
what I want the fans to do as we go along, I want you to kind of think about, like, okay, what do you think your form would be? Like, if you were a Jedi, what form do you think that you would want to adopt? Now, don't go based upon necessarily what looks cool, because everybody wants to flip around like Yoda, but let's just face it, what do you think, based upon your personality, your size, your stature, what do you think you're able to do? And your personality, what form do you think would suit you? And we're going to go through their strengths and weaknesses and all of that.
Yeah, and I'll put that up on the polls too. I'll put a poll up that people can take. But I mean, just even as an example, right? I mean, one of the other things that you can attack from this is just how characters evolved over time with it. One really big example that I can think of offhand is Anakin Vader, right? I mean, before he was in the suit, his fighting style and his combat style were very different from when he was in the suit. And of course, a lot of what he had to relearn, he did so because that suit actually had some limitations. So he had to alter his style. Now, of course, he was equally as powerful, right?
Yeah.
But, that's one of the things. So, as we go into these, these 7 styles, we can keep that in mind. And so, with that, of course, you have to talk about basically the whole introduction to the lightsabers, right? So, I mean, obviously you have these unique fighting styles. They're tailored to specific Jedi. You have, of course, have the historical context, because you have certain challenges that are addressed based on, like Daryl said, the warriors, right? And then, of course, you have the significance, which is, the mastery of the forms and a Force user's approach to it. So, I mean, again, this is going into what you were saying, where sometimes if you have a certain personality or a certain, maybe it's a limitation, like in the case of when Anakin became Vader, you have certain things that obviously are going to drive this. It's not just, okay, I'm going to get a lightsaber. And in fact, I think that was part of Sabine's problem. When she first got the dark saber and, eventually a lightsaber, it was like, okay, well, what are you going to, it's not just combat, same thing. And I think that this is why people were so irritated with Rey.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, you can fight with a staff or whatever, and certainly that puts you a little bit of ahead, but, when you put that in the frame of these 7 forms, a little different.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So the first one is Ted Adam Green mentioned, and actually he didn't mention it. Dragonfly mentioned it.
No, Dragonfly.
Yeah, yep. Dragonfly. Shii-Cho. He thinks that this one's the best. So this is the first form, and of course the foundation. It's a basic form taught to Padawans. This is kind of where they start out. It focuses on broad strokes and stances. Its key moves are the disarming slash, the Sarlacc sweep, which I think is funny. Falling Leaf. A notable practitioner of this is Kit Fisto, who utilized it in the Battle of Geonosis. So, what are your thoughts on this style? And is there anybody else that you know of that maybe practiced it? And then, of course, I know you want to put this also in the framework of modern martial arts. So,
yeah, I mean, I think Shii-Cho is cool. It's like you said, it's a basic form. Everybody kind of learns it when you kind of first start out. Luke had to learn it when he first got on, when he was actually training on the Millennium Falcon. When he was going up against the little training.
The probe. Yep.
Yeah. So, he's basically kind of learning the very basics of, how to handle yourself with a lightsaber. And Shii-Cho is pretty much the introductory stage. And like it says, it's made for broad strokes, and, it's the basic forms. And a lot of Jedi, of course, they have to use it when they first get into it.
Right.
But they eventually kind of start to venture off to other forms because this has a lot of different limitations. It really wasn't intended necessarily for blade to blade combat when it was kind of initially created. So naturally, necessity becoming the mother of all invention, that's what started developing the other forms, because they started saying like, okay, we're running into other practitioners who have lightsabers, and it's just not necessarily the best. So let's but a lot of Jedi do they incorporate it into their kind of like their main style. Most people usually have different styles that they kind of switch in between in general.
And I
think that's kind of one of those things.
Exactly, and I would have no doubt that this, being that this is the first form you use, is the one you practice a lot. I'm sure that this is something that they more or less fall back on, right? I mean, and again, I know that there were some cases where some Jedi actually combined some of the forms, and would switch in and out of them. In fact, I remember reading somewhere that for Revenge of the Sith, Anakin actually switched up forms on Dooku a couple of times. I remember that actually being in the novelization, I think, which, of course, is another thing
actually,
you talked about.
Did it. Yeah, he did that in he switched it in Attack of the Clones. So what I did also, like when I started, doing all this research into it, I actually kind of went back and watched some of the battles and see if I could find the switch when it happened. And it was like, wow, like I really do see it. So that was cool too.
Well, it's a testament to Nick Gillard, who was the stunt coordinator on those.
That guy, that he's a genius.
He's a genius, but it also shows pretty much that deep attention to detail. It's like you're basically, this is something that you don't have to. I mean, how many people are going to do what you just did, where you basically are going, and look, all those people are out there, right? I mean, this is where you get all the Easter eggs from. Somebody in Solo, a Star Wars story, will point out that in Dryden Voss's office, there's like some little artifact from, that was mentioned in some obscure expanded universe novel. Well, how did they see that? I'm sure they didn't see that on first viewing. They probably actually went in and, frame by frame to try to find the Easter eggs, because it's known for that. So when you have somebody like Nick Gillard, who's, just like you said, a genius stunt coordinator, he's going to be one of those guys that takes the time to focus on those subtleties. Like, we're going to switch up these forms.
And you have to think about, like, because now these forms are they're canonical now.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's like, okay, when he's doing this stuff, he's like, okay, now I have to frame which character are using which form, and I keep that in mind, because a lot of times, like, you might have Anakin using one and the Sith Lord using another, right? And he has to keep in mind, like, okay, the movements for both people and what they should be doing. So,
well, and I imagine you probably have to. Now, here's the thing, and it just occurred to me, so I don't know. Hats off to you, by the way, for going the extra mile on some of this stuff, but. The other thing that would have been interesting, I don't know, for all I know, maybe you did this. It would be interesting to also point out what forms would be good to use against whatever the current form we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Because you do bring up a good point, right? I mean, if somebody's using a particular form and it's like, okay, I know, let's say I'm fighting a Sith Lord, I know as a Jedi, okay, maybe this is a form that I favor. But is it necessarily the best to combat this other form that the Sith Lord is using? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there's very few masters who actually mastered all seven. Of course, we know Yoda. Of course. Because he's had 800 years.
Well, and I'm sure Rey has
to do it.
I'm sure Rey was like born with the mastery of all seven.
Right. Well, she read the book really quick.
Yeah, exactly. She read the book and just, kind of executed it. But yeah, it stands to reason that Yoda has, which is really, but who else?
Go ahead. Mace Windu.
That makes sense.
And then Sindralic. He's actually like the main guy who does a lot of the lightsaber training at the temple. He's one of those guys who's just renowned as like kind of the guy to be over the training of Padawans and young knights as far as developing their skills.
I also imagine oh my goodness, I can't believe I just blanked like that quick. The droid in Ahsoka, the one from the Clone Wars, the one that's trained Jedi for 10,000 years.
Oh, man, you made me blank now.
It's so stupid. We just did this whole review every week.
I know.
Where
we say he was like,
the MVP of the series. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know why, but I blanked on his. I'm sure somebody will chat it in, but him. He's got to know all the forms, right? Let me get a couple of these chats in real quick before we go to the next form. Dragonfly Mass says, I note it as the best. It's good because we're talking about Form 1. Because a lot of people say it's the fallback form when no other form works.
True.
And, look, I mean, wasn't it Bruce Lee that said, simplicity is the...
key to brilliance.
Key to brilliance, yeah. And sometimes...
Yang is, by the way, the name of the droid.
Yes, Hu Yang. How could I forget that? So yeah, Hu Yang probably knows all 7 forms, but
of course,
I agree that in a lot of cases, if some of the other forms aren't working, because it's such a basic form, and because it's more or less the meat and potatoes, let's say, of all the forms, I think it might actually be a good combat move because people would be expecting to counter a more complex form. So when you approach them with just like the basic stuff, you know, it could definitely maybe best somebody in battle.
Yeah, definitely.
David, of course.
Dooku's another one. Ah, David's here.
Yep. It's Star Wars Day. Star Wars Day, and it's Lightsaber Day, actually.
Yes. He's Dooku was also a master of all 7, because he actually taught General Grievous all 7.
Oh, that's right. You know what? I forgot. I totally forgot about that, but that's right. Because I remember the Grievous actually knew all 7. So, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, Form 1.
So, Shii-Cho, it's Form 1. It's the basic. I liken it to karate, like basic karate or boxing.
Right. You know, that's right. You got to do the comparison to the modern stuff.
Yeah. So it's like, jab, right hook, cross, uppercuts,
crane technique.
Right. There you go. Wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax off. Right.
So it's basic karate stuff, inside block, outside block. So it's just the foundation of formula of fighting. It's just like, okay, this kind of gives you a very generic and a very broad spectrum of combat. But like I said, in this particular form, it wasn't really necessarily developed for lightsaber combat per se. So it was almost kind of like a melee type thing in some sense, because there's a lot of slashing and there's wide sweeping strokes.
Right.
So when you actually have people who were more refined, which we're going to get to in the next form, that's where Shii-Cho starts to show its weakness, because now it's not as effective.
All right. Well, that said, let's move on to Form 2. So Form 2, and of course, some of these things, Makashi, I think, is dueling elegance, right? So you got refined movements for one-on-one lightsaber dueling. It minimizes energy expenditure. Some of the key moves, Sun Djem, Makashi riposte, contention form. Dooku is a notable practitioner for this form because it's known for its precision and control. So this is one of those things that I think, now we're moving on to another level. Now, let me ask you this before we go on with this, because this is something I don't even know, even though I've read like all these books. And I do remember, even in the encyclopedias that I used to read, they went over all these things ad nauseum. But, there's some things that you're going to commit to memory and other things you're like, okay, this is cool. And you basically move on, right? Yeah. But with this one, do you remember when you're talking about this one and then moving on to the others? Is it a linear thing? Like, is it a progressively, so okay, Form 2 is a little harder than Form 1, but not as much as Form 3? Or is it one of those things where it just basically, it's not necessarily linear, it's just different forms that have different strengths and weaknesses?
Sometimes it's a little bit of both, because so in this instance, this is an upgrade, if you will, from Shii-Cho, because it's like, okay, but the upgrade is due to evolution. So you have people who are like, now we're using lightsabers more. This form, Shii-Cho, is not always the best for someone. So Makashi becomes more the dueling form, because it's made specifically for lightsaber on lightsaber or blade on blade combat. But it takes more of the fencing aspect, which is why, this is heavy on the footwork, and fencing is more so like, ins and outs, and somewhat circular movements. So it's all about the center line. So when you're attacking, you're moving forward, and an attack and you retreat, and your footwork kind of has to match it. So it's and if you look at this picture that you have up there, that's somewhat of a fencing stance. I mean, the back foot would be more closer in, and it's more like what you would see if you watch Zorro. Like that's a great if you watch the movie The Mask of Zorro, and when Anthony Hopkins is teaching Antonio Banderas, how to fight with a sword, how you hold the weapon, you don't hold it too tightly, you don't hold it too loosely. You kind of have to have a nice even grip on your weapon. That's why his lightsaber hilt is a little bit more curved, because it's made for circular motion. So I can easily do this, and if you're attacking me, I can parry a lot easier with the circle that's with a hilt that's kind of curved. So that it was made for more almost like point fighting. So the attack areas for Makashi, it's more like quick little jabs and stabs at a person. It's not really made for slashing. It's more, and if you look at the battle on in Attack of the Clones, when Dooku was going against Obi-Wan, he tagged him on the shoulder, then he tagged him on the leg. Like it wasn't a slash, like a big, cut or anything. It was just more like, I'm gonna maim you type of movement, and it's more so to disarm you. That's generally what it's for, which is how Anakin literally got disarmed. But
it does go into that. But I mean, what's interesting about it though, when you talk about the whole fencing, I mean, one of the things that they also did was that when they designed the lightsaber for Count Dooku, they took into account that Christopher Lee used to do those type of films. He was a very good swordsman. Like in real life, he actually could do the whole fencing thing. He was somewhat like Errol Flynn used to. And so what they did was they wanted to honor that legacy, and they actually gave him that same curved hilt, which honestly, that's one of my favorite of all time lightsaber designs.
The designs?
Yeah. I love that design. Cool. I mean, that was just such a cool design, and it has a certain elegance to it, much like Dooku himself. A little bit regal, noble, that kind of thing.
And the thing about Dooku's lightsaber form, it was, like I said, he's very controlled. It's not really designed for multiple attackers, but he definitely obviously was able to do it, as we've seen him do on multiple occasions, because he was such a master at it. And it's because it's an economy of motion. You're not trying to use a whole lot of energy, and that fits, once again, it fits Dooku, because one, especially as he ages, he got older. So it's like, okay, I don't have time to sit here and jump around and do all this, but I can basically parry and strike, and that's kind of, I'm in and I'm out. That's kind of the whole beauty of Makashi, is you're not expending a whole lot of movement, and you're basically kind of taking that person's strikes and almost like countering it with another. Of course, he tried to teach that to Asajj Ventress. Asajj Ventress used it a little bit, but he was really, and it's funny because Dooku was actually really against anybody who used multiple lightsabers, and he was against cyborgs. So the fact that he taught Grievous, and the fact that his own apprentice used 2 lightsabers, is hilarious to me. There's the irony, because he actually hated that, because he felt like if you can't defend yourself with one, then you really can't defend yourself.
Well, and again, I think a lot of things that you have to look at too with these kind of things is that the older that any Force user gets, whether they're Jedi or Sith, they begin to rely less on the lightsaber and a little bit more on the Force. I mean, even, I mean, it was funny because it was almost a reverse in Attack of the Clones, right? Because Yoda and Dooku were pretty much an even match. He's like, well, I mean, we're even on the Force. Let's see how we do in lightsaber combat. I mean, it's about the only way we're going to settle this. So
exactly,
it is interesting that they do that. And obviously, one of the things that would be cool as a further study on this, and who knows, maybe we'll do another show on this, is if you actually look at the evolution of each of the Jedi and the Sith as far as lightsaber combat goes, like what form did they, I mean, everybody's starting out with Shii-Cho, obviously, but I mean, what do they move to? Like, so Dooku is obviously favoring Makashi. And, the reality is, these guys probably, to a degree, learned all 7. Mastering all 7, that's a different story, but everybody's probably learned it. But it would be interesting to see, like, which form they favored as they got older.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that would be kind of cool. David chats in, he says, hey, this is completely unrelated. All right, well, thanks for the warning, but I knew you all would appreciate this. I showed my son some Marvel books, and the only one he liked was the Star Wars book. Well, David,
that's right, you're training up a child.
Yep, you're raising the kid right. What else can I tell you? So yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that you have a form like Makashi where it is a little bit more in the fencing stuff, because now again, is fencing, like you said, that with each one of these forms you're going to compare it to something modern, in martial arts. Is that going to be what it is, or?
Yeah, fencing is the one that I'm using.
Okay. So fencing is the one that you're using on that. All right, so now we move on to Form 3. So Form 3, how are we saying this? Soresu?
Yep.
All right. Okay, good. I just, I want to make sure that I do these things justice, right? So Soresu, this is the defensive peak here. It's optimized for defense, especially against blasters. That's a really interesting point that I want to get into. Maximizes survival potential. Its key moves are Circle of Shelter, Soresu Stance, Deflecting the Slash, and Obi-Wan is actually the practitioner of this, and he demonstrated this during the duel with Jango Fett. So this is something that I thought was also a stroke of genius, is the fact that, look, in Star Wars, most of the people are using guns, right? They're using blasters of some sort, whether they're rifles or pistols or whatever. So as the Jedi developed, and it went from the Old Republic to the High Republic to whatever they're calling, the timeline of the prequels and original trilogy and stuff, it's almost like they would have had to modify their techniques because, well, now you got blasters coming out, right? And I mean, as we saw at Order 66, you get enough guys that have blasters, and lightsaber's not going to do you much good. So there had to be a form that can contend with this.
Absolutely. And that's what I was saying earlier to, when you asked, like, okay, is it linear? Because it kind of is in a way, but it's based upon evolution of things. And that's exactly what Soresu is for. Makashi is an older form. So most people, that's why you don't see a whole lot of people really using that form. It's kind of an outdated thing. And that's why Dooku was so, they learned about it, but no one really used it, because at the time period, it's like, all right, you didn't have a whole lot of people really using lightsabers that the Jedi were contending against. They had to contend with people with blasters.
What would have been funny though? I mean, I almost wish they had these lines in the movies, like when Anakin first started facing Dooku, if he had been like, seriously, Makashi, this is what we're doing? Yeah, all right, boomer.
Just start calling them out. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, Grandpa.
Exactly. It's like, what is this, Old Republic? I mean, it would have been, look, it's a lost opportunity for comedy, I'm just saying, but please, continue.
Right. So, like you said, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Syndralic, once again, this is kind of their wheelhouse. But Obi-Wan, honestly, even Mace Windu said this, that Obi-Wan literally became like the master of Soresu. Like that was his bag. And that's why he always does that stance whenever he ignites his lightsaber, like, I will do what I must, and the blade is like, that's the stance for Soresu. So even with Makashi, when Dooku did the whole salute to Yoda, almost like that whole formal regal, he ignited the blade and held it to his face, and he's like, all right, let's have battle. Like, I challenge you to a duel.
It's the subtleties. I cannot stress this enough. That, I mean, obviously Lucas drives the ship on this, but everybody from the stunt coordinator to, everybody are paying attention to these little subtle details, which is one of the things I think that separates Star Wars from a lot of the other bigger franchises, is its attention to detail. I mean, I guess you could say Star Trek pretty much rivals that too. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit different in the styles in which they do it, but I can say that, yeah, the reason why they're probably two of the biggest, if not the biggest, space franchises is because they just pay severe attention to every little nuance, every little detail. And of course, this is another thing too, right? This is probably why, and I'm sure you're going to go into this, but this is probably why Obi-Wan was able to contend with Grievous so well.
Yeah, because this whole form is 90%, I also even say 95% based upon defense.
Exactly, it's defense.
It's a whole defensive form. And so the objective is really almost kind of, if you think about the for those of you who are boxing fans, think about Muhammad Ali when he did the whole, rope-a-dope thing. It's pretty much like, I want to tire you out. I want you to swing and swing and swing into your heart's desire. And I'm pretty much going to parry, block, defend, until you get tired. Once you get tired, you're going to make a mistake, and that's when I'm going to strike. So that's the whole background on Soresu, which Obi-Wan, like I said, it became like pretty much the master of it, and it takes a lot of patience because you have to literally wait until an opening comes out and then you strike. And it could be kind of boring if for some people, but if you think about Obi-Wan, that's Obi-Wan's personality. Obi-Wan is a very laid back. He's always preaching about patience, young one, patience, Anakin. Like he's always just easygoing. He's meticulous. He's more like, okay, let's wait to see how things evolve. Where Anakin was always more, no, let's just go after it. What are we waiting for? And it's reflective in his style. That's why he's also known as a negotiator. Obi-Wan was always about diplomacy. He was kind of more at peace. So, and because he really believed in the Jedi way, which was, we're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. So I'm going to do things about defense, not attack.
I also might add, this is probably why he had all his limbs.
Yeah, that too.
It's like, look, he basically had the patience. He practiced restraint, which is something that over time, especially after the Clone Wars, I think a lot of Jedi started losing that little attribute,
Yeah, and it's hard, just waiting for, but it's kind of a protective thing. So he's always protecting, safe zones and things like that. Now, originally Obi-Wan was studying another form. He actually switched to Soresu because of the failings that he saw in the original form in which he was studying, which we're going to get to next. But I would liken Soresu to more of a Wing Chun or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, simply because it's
I love these comparisons to the modern thing. Almost makes me wish I had a graphic for that one, because that's a great thing. Because that's something that I don't think a lot of people do. I don't think they make the connection to the modern martial arts styles, and I think that in a way shrouds some of these a little bit more in a mystery, because again, it's really difficult to try to pick these things out when you're watching these battles, especially the ones that are a little bit more faster pace,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like Wing Chun and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because in Wing Chun you're pretty much it's all about counters. It's like, okay, you push, I pull, you do this, I do that, I circle. There's a whole you'll see people on the Wing Chun dummy do like the whole circle thing with their hands. It's basically they're parrying a punch. It's basically countering. So that's all pretty much Soresu is basically counter strikes. And when I counter, you leave yourself open for me to strike. Same thing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You have to be patient. Everything is in a fast pace. You're kind of waiting for your moment. You do setups, and that's kind of what Soresu is as well. You're setting your opponent up for your ultimate strike. And then once you have them, it's like, okay, boom, I got you. And usually it's because you've worn yourself out to a point where now, I can take over.
Yeah.
So Obi-Wan Sindralic, Ki-Adi-Mundi, that is Soresu, Form 3.
All right. So now we'll move on to Form 4. Ataru?
Yep.
Is that how we're saying it? Look at me go with the pronunciations. All right. So Ataru is basically a little bit, it's got the whole dynamic assault. Basically, it emphasizes speed, agility, acrobatics, uses the force to enhance physical abilities, which is important. Its key moves are the Saber Swarm, the Hawk Bat Swoop, the Falling Avalanche. I love it. It sounds like dives and swimming. Notable practitioners are Yoda, who showcased this in duels with both Dooku and Darth Sidious. So this is something because a lot of people had always wondered, well, which one did Yoda more or less? I mean, obviously, like we say, he's an expert on all of them, but which one was he using that we could see? And I think that this actually is a really cool form when you're just analyzing it, at least so far, against the other three. I mean, of course, there's one that I think both of us like better. We haven't discussed it, but I just have a feeling that I know. And, but this one I think is actually somewhat effective. In particular, I would actually say, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I would think that this would be good against also if you're battling, say, a creature that's a little bit stronger or whatever, because again, you're using the force to enhance a lot of these abilities, which is giving you a little bit more of a push. And when you're dealing with opponents that maybe are overwhelmingly stronger than you, this could be a good form to use.
I would agree because it's you're taking in one of the main things it says in here is it emphasizes speed.
Right.
And so when you're dealing with somebody who's stronger, speed is the perfect counter to that.
Yep.
So Ataru, of course, is Yoda's main form. And it makes sense because, like I said earlier, is that you have to compensate for certain things for your shortcomings. And for Yoda, that's the literal case. His shortcomings.
Exactly. He's short.
He's like 2 feet tall. He's 2 feet tall.
You can see him coming.
So, so when you see him going up against Christopher Lee, who's like 6'2", 6'3", and it's like, okay, Yoda's 2 feet tall. How do you compare with that? Well, the best way to do it is like, okay, well, now I'm going to basically become a pinball in Yoda's case and bounce all over the place where it's hard to actually land a strike on me because you don't know where I'm going to be. It's one of those things. I often liken it to the peekaboo style that Mike Tyson used to use. Mike Tyson, because he was like 5'8", but he was, of course, he's built like a bulldog, but he often fought taller opponents. And people always wonder, like, well, how in the world is Mike Tyson knocking out these guys that's like, almost like a half a foot taller than him? And it's because Mike Tyson knew actually when he threw punches, by the time you try to counter it, he's in a different spot. So you hardly get a chance to hit him. And so Ataru was kind of in that fashion as well. Another notable person that most people wouldn't think who was an Ataru savant, so to speak, is Qui-Gon Jinn. Because you really don't see it because he's older, but his movements were more like, okay, he's not jumping all over the place like a Yoda. However, his movements are, okay, I'm going to use speed in some ways, and I'm going to change directions. That's where, and you see that more in the second battle, not so much when he first encountered Darth Maul, but the second time when they were actually in that hangar, that's where you kind of start to see it a little bit of the Ataru. Also, another person, a couple of people who you may not know who specialized in Ataru was Quinlan Voss and Mara Jade.
Oh, interesting.
That was also Mary. Yeah, Mary Jade.
I knew about Quinlan Voss. I did not know about Mara Jade, which is really interesting, and that actually makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Because you know, Mara
most
Jade,
guys are stronger than her, so she had to use speed.
And she's, you know, being that she was the Emperor's hand, of course, is all expanded universe stuff, right? I mean, they have yet to make Mara Jade canon, but basically she was what they call the Emperor's hand, and she was like kind of one of the bodyguards, really, even higher up than the royal guards. She was kind of like an assassin in a sense. So yeah, yep. she without question had to be pretty much up on some of this stuff, and she would actually be somebody who would encounter other Force users in combat, and so therefore she had to have a style that, like you said, could compensate for any weaknesses she might have had or any shortcomings she might have had. So that's pretty interesting.
Now, the problem and shortcomings with the Ataru is that it leaves you kind of open for a lot of attacks. So that's the caveat. So that's why a lot of people will try to use that speed, because if I'm fast enough, you can't catch me. But if you are, or if your style is savvy enough, you can actually stop me because I'm leaving myself open for attacks, because and this is why, and I'll use this and I'll kind of give a little background, but the martial arts that I would compare Ataru to is capoeira and taekwondo, because those are capoeira is definitely because you're definitely all over the place. You're using angles. It's a lot of misdirection. It's very acrobatic. Same with taekwondo. It's basically flying kicks, which is why that's a martial art form that I never really got into, because I learned very early that when you leave your feet, you kind of you have nothing. You're just in the air.
You're more vulnerable to attacks.
You're more vulnerable to attack. So now, granted, it looks cool, and yes, they can add a lot of power behind it, because you're doing running and leaping and all that stuff. But at the same time, it leaves you very vulnerable to a lot of counterattacks. So that's the same thing with Ataru. So some of those people, like I say, Yoda, Qui-Gon, Mara Jade, Quinlan Voss, are Ataru practitioners, and I liken it to capoeira or taekwondo.
All right. So moving on to Form 5, we have, let's see, Shien and Djem.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, once again, got to make sure that this stuff is on point, right? All right, so this has more of an aggressive defense. It evolved from Soresu, and it focuses on turning defense into offense, which is a really interesting thing. I can't wait to get into this. Its key moves are the Shien deflection, fluid riposte, Djem stance, and a notable practitioner is actually Anakin Skywalker. It was optimized with his powerful overhead strikes. Obviously, this is before he was in the suit. So this is interesting, because this is almost the offense version of Soresu, where it focused more on defense. So it's kind of like the other side of that coin. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And that was the big debate. And if you notice that, some of these characters that we are naming, some of them have different forms than their masters.
Yeah,
because Yoda is Ataru, Dooku was Makashi. Then you have Soresu was Obi-Wan, Djem or Shien is Anakin compared to Obi-Wan.
Which, being two sides of the same coin, which they also are personality-wise, it also would make a very effective fighting duo.
Exactly, and that's what made them so well.
And now, even in analyzing this, right, it really brings to the forefront, like, wow, no wonder these guys were so deadly when they were together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's even why when you look back at Phantom Menace, when you look at Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, they were so close because, and with Ataru being, once again, more of an offensive style, Obi-Wan being more defensive, even though he did take on a little bit of the Ataru stuff. Like the part where you see the Ataru come in is after Qui-Gon dies.
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, okay, he's like kind of chomping at the bit. He can't wait to get to Darth Maul. You see how fast Obi-Wan's moving. Like that blade is going.
Yep.
And Darth Maul has to kind of keep up with that. That's the Ataru side coming out. But he abandoned that style because Qui-Gon lost. And so he was like, well, maybe this isn't the best style because I don't want to end up like that. So maybe I need to take more of a defensive posture.
Which style was this guy again? Yeah, let's not do that.
Right.
I think I might do something else, Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I might want to switch up the game a little bit.
Yeah, which is a form that actually wins battles? Let me get that going.
Now, here's a cool thing. So with 4 and 5, there's kind of like 2 parts to it. So we see Shien, which is kind of like the sister or brother to Soresu, because Soresu was really designed for against blaster attacks. That's why Obi-Wan was so good at deflecting blasters or blaster shots. However, Soresu was more designed for dodging blasters. Shien is more reflecting those blasters back at their target.
I see, turning into more of an offensive move.
Of an offensive thing.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Jimso, that's more, like I said, of an aggressive form. We see, and when you look at Anakin, one of the notable things is like if you look at Attack of the Clones, when he was actually going against Dooku, initially when he starts to fight, he goes after him. He's using Jimso. Then there's a point in time where Obi-Wan throws that second lightsaber to him.
Mm-hmm. That's
when he switched to Ataru. But he wasn't really good in Ataru, which is why Dooku was able to take that blade from him really quick because, of course, Dooku being such a master. So then Anakin had to revert back to basically Jimso again. And Jimso was Anakin's thing. It fits his personality. However, he wasn't as proficient in Attack of the Clones. That's why it made it so much better when we got to Revenge of the Sith, when he told Dooku, he was like, my powers have doubled since the last time we met. And you definitely see it. You see he's more confident. He's stronger physically, and he's faster. Jimso is a great... I almost liken Anakin to almost like a Floyd Mayweather, Muhammad Ali punching style in a way with Jimso, because it's very counter. It's like, okay, it counters, but also I'm going to come at you with this.
Right.
But the boxing so that's the boxing style that I would kind of compare it to. But really, what Jimso is more like, if we're talking about modern day martial arts, is Muay Thai, because it's so aggressive. Mm-hmm. And it's like you're chopping away and you're hammering at stuff. So when you see Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, when he's fighting Dooku, and then of course eventually when he goes after Obi-Wan, those hits are like, and he's coming at you with such power. He overwhelms you with physical strength, and not only is his actual physical strength, but he's actually using the Force as well to compound that. So he wears you down with such power that is just like, and of course him being the chosen one, I mean, that thing, he's just going to town on people. Absolutely. And that's what makes him so formidable, being such a phenomenal Jimso practitioner, is that it allows him for more creative blocks and parries and counter strikes. So he's more so, but he's also wants to press the conflict. He's trying to put the pressure on you so much that it overwhelms you to the point where you give up. In Muay Thai, you see a lot of guys, they do those leg kicks and they're snapping that leg. And it's to wear you down to the point, it's like where you can't even stand or walk on it anymore. And it's like he basically takes it away from you. So that's why I compare Jimso to more of a Muay Thai fighting style. Ahsoka, of course, being his Padawan is another practitioner of Jimso as well. She kind of uses more of the Shien because of how she holds that second blade, the shorter, that's almost like a dagger. That's more of her deflector, while the longer staff is more so for her aggressive movements.
All right, well, that makes sense. So again, and I hope that as we're going through these forms, it really opens you guys up to not just looking at this a little bit more subtly, but also you go back and you rewatch some of these lightsaber battles, you can start to pick up a lot of these subtleties of each of these forms. And so it's really interesting. So, okay, moving on to...
one more.
All right.
Before we leave Jimso, I forgot. Luke Skywalker. Can't forget the GOAT, right? Yeah, Luke Skywalker is also another one. We see it heavily in his second bout with Vader on in the throne room with the Emperor. Now, originally he kind of starts off with somewhat of a Shii-Cho. At least that's what it seems. But that part when when Vader says, if you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will, and then he goes after. That's when you see the Djem show. That's when like all bets are. And if you notice, like he's doing a lot of overhead strikes. That's how he cuts Vader's hand off. It's those overhead. He's just going to town on Vader because
so basically, like... it might be episode 6, but we're seeing form 5.
There you go.
All right. Well, speaking of 6, let's go to form 6. Now, are we pronouncing this Niman or Niman?
Niman.
Niman. See, this is why I always have to check these things. That's the one thing I did not check because it's like I said, it's been a while since I really got into this stuff. So this one's about balanced harmony. It incorporates elements from all forms, often used with dual blades or saber staffs. Its key moves are Draw Closer, Twin Suns, and Niman Salute. That sounds like a drink to me. Notable practitioner, Exar Kun, adept with dual-bladed lightsaber technique. All right, so everybody knows that I love Exar Kun. He's by far one of my favorites. And it was interesting that they actually use him. Even though I know you usually do this at the end or when you're explaining this stuff, but who are some other notable ones? Because again, Exar Kun might be a little bit maybe out there for some of the people that are watching this. So is there anybody that maybe the normal people might know?
Normal people. Well, there is one.
All right.
Darth Maul.
Okay.
Darth Maul is very much and somewhat of Asajj Ventress. She's been known to use it, a little bit. She's kind of a mix of between Makashi and Niman.
I'm surprised Rey doesn't use this, being that it's kind of a dual blade or saber staff kind of thing,
Yeah, you would think, but because she still used a single blade, I guess it probably didn't work for her. I think Rey was a little bit more on the she tried to do a little bit more of the Djem show thing. She just didn't look as good with it, quite frankly.
Probably because they did not have Nick Allard as a stunt coordinator for the sequel trilogy.
Exactly.
That's the real explanation, right? I mean, we got to come up with these in-universe things, but that's what's really going on. So
exactly,
yeah.
But Niman, it's funny because like in most of the Star Wars community, and even in within Star Wars, within canon, this isn't a form that most people like to use because it's kind of, but it makes sense though. So it's more called the diplomatic style. So people who usually use this are like the Sentinels, who are like, protecting the Jedi temples and things like that. They use that particular style. Or people who don't draw their lightsabers a whole lot, they kind of use this this style. Maybe Jocasta Nu might even do something like this. Even though she was quite formidable as well.
Oh yeah. As we find out in the comic books, yes.
Exactly, right?
Absolutely.
But it's more of a balance thing. Yeah, and it's more, and it combines. It doesn't use all the forms, but it's Shii-Cho, Soresu, uh, Ataru, and Jimso. Um, and you see a lot, like I said, with Darth Maul, because you see the Ataru because he does a lot of acrobats. He's flipping around and doing these cartwheels. Kudos to Ray Park, who really brought that character to life.
Mm-hmm.
Who's Ray Park himself, the actual man, not is actual master of wushu. So that's where, and you see a lot of that in that particular art form as well. The flipping and all that stuff is more of a wushu type thing. But Niman is not wushu though. It's more of a balance thing. It's more, and it was designed really to be almost to be the perfect art form. I mean, the almost the perfect art form, the perfect fighting style, because it's supposed to be balanced. It's really supposed to embody the best of offense and defense, which makes sense because when you're dealing with a staff, essentially that's what you have. You have an offensive side and a defensive side at any given moment. So if I had to compare this style, I would compare it to Jeet Kune Do, which is the style created by the one and only Bruce Lee. Just because that's exactly what Bruce Lee did, or your typical MMA, you could throw that in there as well, where you're basically combining a bunch of different art forms into making it one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically Jeet Kune Do is the way of the intercepting fist. You're intercepting things and returning back, and so that's essentially what's happening when you're in this lightsaber combat style. You're basically intercepting with one and striking with the other. So Niman is more of a Jeet Kune Do. You will find that more with Darth Maul, Exar Kun, people who use a lot of double-bladed weapons, or who have two blades like Asajj Ventress, or some of your sentinels that's outside the temple.
All right, well, Dragonfly's got a couple of comments about this. So he basically says, Rey should have used a double lightsaber.
I agree. I thought they were setting that up.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, and I was really surprised that they didn't do that. I mean, It was really weird, like at the end where she kind of had that staff lightsaber thing that was...
Well, yeah, she took part of her staff and made it into a lightsaber.
And made it into a lightsaber, which I guess was sort of cool. But yeah, I always thought the same thing. I always thought she would have... Actually, what I wish she had done, like the evil Rey, that double-bladed lightsaber was cool. Yeah. That's what should have been hers.
The switchblade one?
Yeah. Yeah, that thing was awesome. I'm like, what a wasted opportunity. It's like in one scene. Yeah. It's probably like one of the coolest lightsaber designs of all time. And yet, we get to see it, once and it's gone. To me, that was a wasted opportunity, but that's
the sequel in a nutshell.
That's true. You want to...
A lot of wasted opportunity, you got Phasma and everybody else.
Yeah, you're not... Exactly. It's the Phasma of lightsabers. All right. He also goes on to say, most of the Jedi that died in the Battle of Geonosis used Form 6, which I always thought was a subtle way of showing the death of diplomacy. That,
That's true.
I mean, why not? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
look,
true.
As we've said, if nothing else, these people that are making these films, particularly the prequels in the original trilogy, they're paying attention to that kind of detail. So I would not, in the least, put this past George or anybody else. If you want to equate that as somewhat of an analogy of the death of diplomacy, I could go with that. I honestly could.
Well, it totally makes sense because, like Mace Windu said, they were keepers of the peace, so they weren't trying to be soldiers. They weren't trying to go out and do battle. Like you said, Eric, on numerous occasions, they're like monks. They're just really trying to, hey. And for most times, Niman will work in most situations because they're not coming up against all these, obstacles. But then when you're like in an arena where everybody's got blaster fire going everywhere, I mean, it doesn't really, that.
Yeah, Niman's not going to cut it in that situation.
Yeah, you need more of a Soresu type thing.
Exactly. All right, so now we move on to Form 7, which I'm going to say is probably your favorite form. Is that true?
It's one of my favorites, yes.
All right. So how do you say this? Juyo?
Juyo
and
Vaapad.
And Vaapad. All right. So basically, with this, it's fierce chaos. It's the most aggressive and unpredictable form. It requires strong emotional control. Its key moves are the Cyclone Slash, Falling Leaf Return. That actually is kind of funny. Vaapad Flow. And of course, as most fans know, Mace Windu is the only Jedi Master of Vaapad, and he used it against Darth Sidious. I think that's one of the few things that I think did leak into more of the public or casual consciousness. They may not have known the name. I mean, we, of course, knew the name of this before, we did any of this, right? But I think a lot of people did understand that because Mace sort of used a combination of the dark side and the light side, that he was using a lightsaber form that also utilized both of those disciplines. And again, it's one of those things that, if I remember correctly with Form 7, it is a really fine line between control and chaos. And you really have to, like we're saying, you have to have control. Like really good emotional control to really utilize this form effectively. So, what would you say?
Absolutely. No, I mean, Vaapad is used primarily by only two people, at least on the Jedi side of things, and that's usually Mace and Yoda. And then on the dark side of things, it was used by Palpatine. So that was his, and it makes sense because, I mean, he's like the ultimate evil, right?
Dark, right? I mean,
exactly. Like the darkest of the dark. He's going to use the dark side, to his advantage. And
it'd be great if he used Shii-Cho. Just using the most basic. It's like, listen, I can shoot lightning out of my fingers. I really don't need to do this.
Well, it's funny because, and I think it was Dragonfly Mask who said this earlier when he was talking about Shii-Cho. So Kid Fisto, he's one of, like I said, the notable practitioners of Shii-Cho. In that scene where they march into the Emperor's the office or whatever, he was actually one of the last guys to fall by Palpatine's blade because he was so good at Shii-Cho. And it's, once again, it's a testament to his mastery of that particular form, but even that wasn't good enough to deal with old Sheev Palpatine. In the book, Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin walked into the room and he saw Mace and Palpatine going at it, the blade, he said it just looked like a blur because the blades were moving so fast.
I know, and I made the mistake of reading that book before seeing the movie. I will never do that again because from all the scenes that were cut that I was looking forward to seeing, to the descriptions of all these bad. And don't get me wrong, I mean, Revenge of the Sith was awesome. It was great. It was one of those, one of my favorite Star Wars films easily. But I have to say, it was a little bit of a letdown if you read the book. You're kind of like, where's the? I mean, that would actually, to me, describe more the Obi-Wan Anakin duel than anything else. But again, let me just go on record as saying that the Mace Palpatine duel is actually one of my favorite duels in the entire franchise. So,
oh, absolutely. And the thing that sucked, honestly, is because that wasn't supposed to happen that way. Originally, it was supposed to be a stunt person doing that battle, and they were just going to put Ian's on the close-ups.
Yep.
But George made the executive decision that he wanted Ian, and they only have, and Ian only, he's a trained Shakespearean actor. He's not a, he's not a physical guy like that. So he only had 15 minutes to learn the moves. So that's why it looked the way that it looked. And they kind of had to slow it down in a way. If you notice, like they kind of slow things down to show certain things, and they did a lot of things close up because Ian wasn't really able to do a lot of the movements. But Nick Gillard actually has footage of what it was supposed to be, and man, just even the green screen footage just looks.
I know.
I was like, man, we got robbed.
Insane. We did. But I will say this. In some ways, and this isn't me just like wishful thinking. In some ways, I almost think it was effective because now you're seeing Palpatine's face through the entire thing. And the way that he was looking and the menacing, it was almost like I don't even have to move that fast because I am that powerful. And I think in some ways it actually enhanced the feeling that they were going for, even though the stunt version that, yes, and we've seen that and it's spectacular. So it would have been a lot prettier. It would have been a lot more bombastic. But in some ways, I actually think that what they ended up doing was more effective. It's almost like the difference in Jaws, between not showing the shark and showing the shark. They were going to show the shark all over the place, but because they were having so many issues, they're like, well, let's shoot barrels in them, and then we'll kind of use that as a stand-in, and it ended up making the film more effective. So there is that.
Yeah, and Vaapad is one of those styles that's really cool. It's it's a very, I don't want to say it's sneaky, but it's kind of sneaky. Like it's more of a slick kind of style. And this is the reason why I say that Vaapad is very similar to ninjutsu. Which is a style I've studied, and because it's very deceptive, that's the word I want to use. It's deceptive. It's like, okay, you think I'm doing this, and it's like sleight of hand. Like my hand is right here, but I'm really going over here. And because I'm moving so quick, you don't even realize it's happening to you. But because it's moving so aggressively, you get caught up in the moment of it, and before you realize, you're gone.
Yep.
And that's the power of Vaapad. So that's one of those things that I really enjoyed about that art form. But like I said, it was used by Mace, Palpatine, and of course, Yoda was aware of it as well. He didn't really practice it a whole lot, but when he went up against Sidious, he was using more, the Ataru style. But there were some things where you could see where Yoda used a little bit of the Vaapad, just to kind of keep the Emperor at bay, just to let him know, like, hey, I know what you're doing.
Exactly.
So
like,
don't even try it.
Like
I'm no slouch out here.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's, utterly fantastic. Let me get a couple of chats in from Dragonfly really quick. It says, love that fight. You can see him blocking attacks at Mace, so Mace, in the counterattack. So the interesting thing, too, that I also picked up on is it seemed like they were foreshadowing the fact that Rey was related to Palpatine and the fact that she used a lot of that same stabbing motion that Palpatine did. So I almost wonder if maybe Rey was using a little bit of that, albeit maybe not consciously. But, I don't know. Maybe that's just kind of a genetic. All Palpatines are into that,
That's a good thing. It could be.
I mean, it's just one of those things that you start to think in light of these different, these different styles. I mean, that's just maybe what you would think. So, in conclusion, when you're looking at these forms as reflections, each form mirrors the philosophical and tactical choices of its practitioner. You have this whole adaptive combat concept where the forms have evolved with the Jedi, as we pointed out earlier. It showcases the adaptability and resourcefulness. And, of course, we can't ignore the fact that this has had a cultural impact. Basically on, all these lightsaber forms have become a defining element of lore and fandom. And then for references, look, we got a lot of this stuff from the various canonical texts, visual guides, character studies, combat analyses from the Star Wars Expanded Universe. And of course, don't forget that Daryl did quite a bit of research on his own as far as, comparing these things and pretty much analyzing the various battles in the films and trying to match the style and figuring out when they may have switched styles. I mean, it's really interesting because, again, it's something that I brought up earlier. When you look at these things, you really see the care and the imagination and just the overall attention to detail, that the filmmakers basically had when they created these, because when you go back and you actually see these, you see evidence of this stuff. It's not like it was just one of these things of, okay, we have all these on-screen battles, now let's ascribe a bunch of forms to it and, try to make it something that it isn't. I mean, you actually see this reflected on the screen, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Kurosawa films that Lucas was inspired by, he was inspired by feudal Japan and, some of the more the Shogun type stuff and everything else, that I think that he probably paid quite a bit of attention to this from a storytelling perspective, and he hired the people who could actually bring this to life on the screen, I would think.
Yeah, definitely, man. You have to find, like I said, somebody like a Nick Gillard who's really can make these unique to each practitioner. Of course, we know, like overall, like as Vader, like you may mention of earlier, when Vader got into the suit, okay, well, he couldn't do all the things that we saw him do in episode 3, but what he did was he adapted a lot of different things to fit his current circumstance, and now that, he wasn't as tall, when he was, in mostly human form, he didn't have all these mechanical things. He couldn't raise his arms above over his shoulders like he used to. So he had to find, because he had those shoulder pads, those little epaulets on his shoulders. So there's a lot of different things that, he had to adapt to. Yoda being 2 feet tall, like I said, he had a lot of challenges. So he had to find styles that fit not only his personality, but also his circumstances. And so I think that what George did when he actually created these characters, and he's like, okay, I need these, especially when he got into the prequel era, he's like, okay, I need these guys to kind of have a unique thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that was really cool and great. And once again, that's part of storytelling. That's part of the detail that's missing sometimes when we talk about the sequel trilogy and things like that. It's just that attention to detail, that part of storytelling that's missing. And that's why, some fans get so irritated, because it's like, man, we lost that. So also, if you want to look at some of these tutorials, as far as like, they actually have a great choreographer. There's a guy named Mike Starwalker on YouTube. I know, right? But he does a phenomenal job where he actually breaks down each style. He gives a tutorial on how to execute this style. If you want to do your own choreography and make your own Star Wars films, like he's telling you, if you want to use this style, this is how you use it. And he gives you drills and different key points on how to use those attacks and defenses. So that's also a really cool resource as well.
Yeah, well, and that's great. And I mean, look, if you guys are interested in these fighting forms and maybe doing further research on it, again, there's a lot of stuff in the various visual dictionaries, the Star Wars encyclopedias that they have that are out. Obviously, you can see a lot of references into the old expanded universe. And as you just mentioned, YouTube channels. There's a bunch of them on the subject. So hopefully you guys got something out of this today. If you did, hit that like button and definitely hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. Because, look, every morning we actually we release these YouTube shorts that are basically like these really quick just little 15-second blurbs of character profiles, pretty much, for lack of a better term. But one of the things that I think would be interesting for us to do, and you guys can let us know in the comments if you think this is a good idea or not, is maybe make some longer form content. Not like our live streams long form, but, maybe like a 15-minute, 10-minute video or something where we just have a character, we focus on that character, and we just talk about that character for 10 minutes and then release that out. And maybe we do that a couple of times a month or something. So let us know in the comment section if you guys would be interested in that, because we'd be more than happy to make that for you guys. So,
absolutely. Before we get out of here, though, I did pose a question for everyone at the very beginning of this. So after we've gone through all 7, which forms do you think that you would adopt? What forms do you think? Let us know in the comment section. What's of the 7? You can combine some of them if you feel like, because that's what a lot of Jedi practitioners did as well. Some people combined. I know for me, I'm a combination. And so some people might want to add, some combos to theirs. Don't cheese out and say, I'll be a master of all 7. Don't do that. But really think about it and think of, right, Eric. So, speaking of which, do you think you have out of the 7, which ones do you think would fit your style?
I'd have to go with Vaapad, to be honest.
Okay.
Only because one of the things that I've always admired about the style is it's a very controlled style, and it also utilizes a little bit of the light and dark, which I think could confuse a lot of opponents, because a lot of times most of your opponents are strictly light side, strictly dark side. You come up with a fighting style that utilizes both elements of the Force, and you combine that with some of the other elements of that particular style. It's an aggressive style. It's something that can stamp things out very quickly. I mean, Soresu would be probably like a close second for me, because, again, I like things that would work in a variety of situations. So I think those 2 styles would probably be basically Form 3 and Form 7. I think those would be the ones that would work. Speaking of light side...
now you're in the dark.
Now I'm somewhat in the dark. Yeah, my...
well, you got the light and the dark. See,
you got the light and the dark, yeah. Well, I guess I can't have a blue lightsaber now. It's like, we were right at the end of the show, too. But yeah, that's probably what I would do. It would probably be like one of those 2.
Okay. For me, it would be Vaapad and Jimso. Jimso would be because
I can see that.
I like the counter. I love the counter of, and it's aggressive enough where it's like, okay, but it provides me enough defense where it's like, okay, I'm not leaving myself too open. But given, just my stature, it just fits more. I'm going to utilize more of my physical strength because I have it. Like, why not use it? And then Vaapad, just because in studying ninjutsu when I was younger, I do like the art of surprise. I do like the it's more of a cunning type of style, and I like mixing things up where it's not so predictable, and that also always makes you a formidable opponent. So,
and it works well in a variety of situations.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I mean, a lot of times when people pick these things, they go, well, this would probably be the coolest. But I mean, in this case, though, it actually has some strategic advantages that I think may be lacking in some of the other forms. So I think that's good. So Dragonfly's got a couple of things. First, he says, great show. You guys really knocked it out of the park with this show. Thanks,
Thanks, man.
Yeah, that really means a lot, because we did...
Eric put a lot of work into creating these graphics.
Yeah, and, it's one of those things that we try to... When you're dealing with something like this, it's beyond just having a conversation. I mean, it's really like we're going in, and it's almost educational in a way, so we really did want to make sure that there was value in this show. It's not like the usual, well, I think that's like Form 6, I mean, no, we really wanted to present. It's like, look, if we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this right. He goes on to say that his two forms would be Shii-Cho and Niman. So,
okay,
that makes I could see that.
I think Dragonfly is more. See, I think if I'm not mistaken, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but Dragonfly strikes me as more of a samurai enthusiast. So probably subscribes to the whole Bushido honor system, especially given these forms that he selected. I was just going to go on a limb and say that one.
Well, and it's an interesting, and it's an interesting combination of forms too.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, and that's one of the things that, obviously we're going to be wrapping up the show in a few minutes, but yeah, let us know what forms you guys would do. Of course, Dragonfly says you are spot on. So kudos for you, man. But here's the thing. And honestly, like I said, I want you guys to leave in the comments section which form or forms you would adopt. But I'll also put up a poll. I'll probably put up on Twitter too, but I'll definitely put it in the community tabs for this channel. And just, maybe what's your favorite form? Like which form out of all the ones that were covered today is your favorite? So it should be cool. Now we did last Friday, unfortunately, circumstances prevented us from going live. So we're going to try it again this Friday night, and it's going to be that topic. We're going to try to unite the canon. I believe that was, I think it was Ted Adam Green that was the one that suggested that one. But
yep,
we're gonna try to take a lot of what was happening in the Mandoverse. So in particular, it's basically focusing on the Mandoverse and the sequel trilogy, and moving forward, trying to unite this, right? Because you had the Mandoverse taking place pretty much close to Return of the Jedi. The sequel trilogy takes place like 30 years later. You have a bunch of things going on. You're going to have a movie that eventually takes place after Episode 9 that's focused more on Rey and her rebuilding the Jedi Order. So it's like, moving forward, how would we deal with a lot of the problems that have been created by Lucasfilm in some of the decisions they've made, and how do we take this from a story perspective and reunite it? It's too bad that we actually did this for Friday, because that would have been the good special Thanksgiving thing that we always do with Kazi. When we bring him in on Wednesday night, the day before Thanksgiving, that would have been a good roundtable discussion. And who knows, maybe we'll make a part 2 video or something and bring him in for that show. Because we still haven't decided what we're going to do for our annual, night before Thanksgiving special, where we bring our friend Dave Kazi in, which we've done every year so far for the last, 3 or 4 years now, and have like kind of a roundtable discussion, especially because, we've gotten a ton of copyright strikes on anytime we try to review anything. So I think we're going to not do that now.
Right.
And, just bring up some stuff that would be a really cool 3-way discussion, have you guys chat, and what a way to spend the night before Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving you spend, that is if you live in the United States. I also recognize that we do have people from, all over the world who are watching it. Yeah. So, I mean, but you guys all know the drill, right? I mean, in the United States, Thanksgiving, we're spending time with family and friends, basically expressing thankfulness for what we have. The night before, it's kind of weird because it's like the biggest bar night of the year or something, I think I heard. So everybody's getting destroyed the night before Thanksgiving, probably because they know they have to deal with their family and friends. But,
mother-in-laws are invading their house.
Exactly. It's like, look, instead of going out to the bar and spending some outrageous amount of money on drinks, bring it home with you and watch us. Watch us and enjoy it. And then, of course, it's Friday, 11, which is our usual target time, 11 p.m. We'll be on and we'll start this discussion about how we unite the Mandoverse, the sequel trilogy, and try to make sense of the canon. All right, so you're going to want to join us for that. Again, you haven't had a chance to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, please do so now. And until Friday, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.